All right. So we should be up and running now. Welcome back to another episode of Mysteries After Dark. I am your host, Jerry. I've been I've been messing with the audio settings for quite a while now. Actually, a few days on and off, trying to get better audio. You're always kind of chasing that elusive equilibrium, especially when you're a one-man show like myself. I don't have a producer. I wish I did. That would be so awesome. So, sometimes it takes a while to get the gremlins worked out, so to speak. On a kind of a sad note, but I'm sure he's going to be okay. Ron Patton, the producer for Ground Zero with Clyde Lewis, posted up today on his Facebook page that tonight's episode has been canceled. Clyde Lewis is heading into the ER. It seems he has an infection in his leg. So, Clyde, you are in our prayers. Um, God, I hate to hear that. I don't know if they're going to do a rerun or if we're going to have a host, step in and kind of run the episode. Maybe Mr. Gable. Secret Teachings. I love that guy. All right. So, again, hopefully everything's going to be good and he'll be back at it hopefully on Monday. So that's it. Our thoughts and prayers are with you, buddy. So, for those of you, we're going to kind of get into it right here. For those of you that have listened to me in the past, you know that I'm very much Irish. And I've done episodes in the past about Irish folklore creatures. I've had Diane on with me a few occasions. Thank you if you're out there. And she may or may not be joining us again in the very near future. Uh, but it fascinates me. These stories, this folklore, in many ways, it was a part of growing up. You have leprechauns and gnomes and different types of we say fairies, but they fall under fae. Aye, the fae folk. Uh, so, but those things, those stories, it's folklore. They're always pushed into that mythological category. And when children speak of these things, it's nothing more than a case of an overactive imagination. And when something truly fascinating happens, something that perhaps makes the headlines, the news, they always seem to leave those parts out. So you might be wondering, Jerry, what are you talking about? Let me get to it. It was May of this year. There was a plane flying over the Amazon with a pilot, a mother, and four children. The plane goes down, and tragically, only the four children survive. There was a 13-year-old girl. She was the oldest of the group. Then there was a 9-year-old, a 4-year-old, and an 11-month-old. These kids, these children, against all odds, survived for over a month in one of the deadliest places on Earth. Literally everything in the rainforest, it wants to eat you because in the wild, you are low man on the food totem pole. We are not an apex predator by any means. We, we've had adults go into the rainforest and never come out again. And yet, somehow, these children, they survived for 40 days. And when you look at the news article on this about how they survived, the, the answer is almost comical. Let me explain why I say that. The news is telling us that this 13-year-old girl, she somehow tapped into her ancestral roots. Now, wait a minute. I do believe academia has determined that humans do not pass along genetic memory. Yes, some other species can, but humans, we're not on that list. We do not have that capability. So there would not have been a way for this child, for this 13-year-old girl, to tap into those genetic memories, um, to allow them to survive. It simply cannot be the case. Now, of course, there's another explanation that is given by the children, and of course, there must be if it's on this episode, if it's on this podcast. Um, their explanation does not fit into the accepted natural world. So obviously, that explanation must simply be her or their overactive imaginations. You see, one of the kids, they said that it was an El Duende that kept them alive, and their grandmother seems to agree with this. But of course, that's nothing more than an old wives' tale, just just foolish folklore. It can't be real. Of course not. It's easier to accept that a 13-year-old was able to tap into some DNA memory that allowed them all to stay alive. But imagine how horrible that would have been. You're on a plane that goes down in quite literally the middle of nowhere. You're surrounded by a canopy of trees so thick that sunlight barely gets through. I mean, if you've never seen videos of the Amazon, what we're talking about here is that in the middle of the day, high noon, right, sun's out, it's bright. But if you're on that jungle floor, it's maybe as bright as it gets, where we're at when there's a full moon. You really can't see very well. And worse yet, in this scenario, you have no adults. You're alone. You're abandoned. Rescue teams were immediately sent out to try and find these kids, this family, this downed plane. They scoured the entire area, but these children were nowhere to be found. And that's something else I have an issue with, because most children, they're not going to suddenly think, let's start walking. They're going to be in shock. They're probably going to be trying to stay close to their deceased mother. And I thought that was rather interesting, almost like, dare I say, something led them. But that's what these children did. They left, and according to at least one of the children and their grandmother, they were led and nourished and protected by a duende. Some of you might be wondering, Jerry, what's a duende? Because a duende is not something we hear about around here. We hear about other little creatures. So something you can think of in your head when I mention duende, think of a gnome. Okay, a gnome. Sizes of these creatures, these duendes, um, they vary a little bit. Usually they're small, perhaps only half a foot tall. But we also have, I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of reports and within the folklore, um, depictions of these creatures where they can reach 4 or 5 feet in height. Can you imagine what that would be like, to be out in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly there's this little unknown creature coming towards you, emerging from the dark? Look down. Hello, little buddy. Are you here to help us, or I don't know, accidentally clip off our toes? As funny as that might sound, these creatures, they are known to clip toenails of children. Okay, and sometimes they accidentally mess up, and they take the toe off. Don't get me wrong. Uh, hey, El Duende, you want to help me keep my toenails in check so I don't have to worry about it anymore? I'm totally okay with that, but don't walk off with my pinky toe. Let me keep my toes, man. So again, the plane goes down. Apparently, these children they blazed a trail through the Amazon. As I mentioned, they survived 40 days being surrounded by anacondas, caiman, jaguars, all of which want to eat you. And then you have, I don't know, another dozen or so poisonous insects, arachnids, amphibians. don't play with the frogs in the rainforest. It will not end well for you. But then if you manage to get into a clearing, you finally escape the treacherous jungle maze, you have to worry about harpy eagles. I don't know if you're aware of or know what a harpy eagle is. Massive. They are monstrous, massive birds. And in the clearings, you literally have to worry about one of them swooping down, grabbing one of these kids and taking off, because the at least the smaller kids, the two of the younger ones, they would have been small enough and light enough for this bird to have lifted them and taken off with them. So the reason given to us by authorities uh, for how long, or the reason it took the rangers so long to find the children, is because they didn't stay with it. They wanted to get out there and explore the jungle. Who doesn't want to do that? And there's some very real questions that need to be answered. Okay, some things that maybe most of us don't necessarily think about when we hear a story like this. Here's my questions. They were out there for 40 days. Where did they get water? Because drinking out of lakes or streams in the Amazon, it's a real good way to get dead really fast. There is food in the Amazon as long as you don't eat something poisonous. There's plants down there that if you brush up against, you will find yourself in a world of hurt. And somehow these children avoided all of these perils. But my bigger issue, I guess, is that they had an 11-month-old with them, and it's going to be crying. And by the way, that crying 11-month-old is what ultimately led the rescuers to find them. They they heard the baby crying off in the distance. But my question is, how did these four children keep the predators away? Because as I mentioned, it's full of animals that want to eat you. And if they hear a child crying, they're going to come running for an easy meal. The sound of a baby crying is universally understood just as any animal that gives out a distress call. It's a sign of weakness. It's a sign of an easy meal. So I guess it comes down, honestly, to it, well, it comes down to which scenario is the most plausible. Okay, these children with an 11-year-old somehow avoided all predators. They were able to stay hydrated without getting deathly ill and managed to miraculously provide an 11-year-old with food to keep it alive. So somehow they did that all on their own with the, DNA genetic memories. Or perhaps, just perhaps, they had help from something that we cannot explain. I think that's a fair, I don't know. I think that's something to think about. And these kids in the rainforest, in the Amazon, they're not alone in regards to being, yes, 11-month-old, yep. They're not alone in regards to being helped out by some type of an unknown creature. And by the way, as y'all comment, if something comes up or if y'all have a question, I will cut in, I guess you'd say, and answer it. So, Casey Hathaway, you may or may not be familiar with this story. He was was then. He's older now. He's still alive. He's still alive and well, and that's the issue. He was a 3-year-old boy in North Carolina that was lost in the woods for 2 days in January of 2019. And I know we like to think of the Carolinas as being warm all year round. That's not the case. In December and in January, it gets pretty cold over there, especially at nighttime. where the temperature is usually in the low 30s, and being exposed to those temperatures with being a 3-year old, your odds of survival are not very good. Like you're going to suffer hypothermia. If you live, you're going to be damaged, especially over a 2-day period. So this child, little Casey, when he was rescued, he told a very interesting story. And keep in mind that this is from a 3-year old, so his understanding of the world, it's going to be limited. Okay, essentially, he was lost and sad and crying when what he describes as a bear walked up to him and carried him away, providing warmth and food and shelter. If a bear picks a kid up, it's going to have bite marks. There's, it's not going to be pretty. Bears, they don't have hands like us. It's not going to be able to walk up on 2 legs, pick up a child and walk off. It would pick the child up with its mouth. It doesn't have, bears don't have hands to pick berries. It picks them with its teeth. So there's no way that a bear, which if we're going to be honest, it would rather have eaten this child than provide shelter. There's no way it would have cared for this child. And of course, there is this little issue called hibernation. Bears do that. Bears they don't get up in January. They don't get up until mid or late March, sometimes April. And their hibernation, um, mid-November, some as late as December. But the bears that hibernate for the least amount of time, they're still hibernating from December until March. And this situation took place in January. There's there's no bears that are going to be roaming the forests in the middle of January because there's no food for them. But we have another problem with the story. A crying child, as I mentioned with the 11-month-old in the jungle. A crying 3-year-old child in the Carolinas is going to bring in predators in North Carolina. They have several and large populations of them as well. They're packed with coyotes, wolves, mountain lions, bobcats. All of them would run. They would run to a screaming child for an easy meal. But we also have rattlesnakes, poisonous spiders, and listen, I know a lot of y'all look at a fox and you think, oh, it's so cute. I just want to pet it. A fox will eat your pets and little human. They are not domesticated animals. If you have a small dog outside, a fox will mess it up. It will get eaten. I get, most people live in cities, especially people that have lived there their entire life. You think that a stroll through the woods, it's no big deal. There's nothing out there to worry about. And if you're an adult, you're probably okay. But if your Meals on Wheels, or in this case, a steak and sneakers, you're going to have animals come up to you that want to eat you. And keep in mind, we have had mountain lions attack full-grown adults. What do you think? What do you think they would do to a toddler? So the only thing we know for certain about this situation with little Casey, something took care of him. Something protected this child and kept him alive, and there is no way possible that it was a bear. However, let me say this. There are a lot of cartoons with, friendly bears walking around on their hind legs, looking just like a human, walking upright. So, adorable and cute. And those bears, they're able to pick food with their fingers. In cartoons, their claws work just like hands. I don't know if you've ever watched The Jungle Book. I mean, they can juggle oranges and play games. So let me ask you, what what might fit what might fit that cartoon bear description? Something something that's larger than a human, of course, because bears are larger than humans. 3-year-olds understand that. Something as dexterous as a primate, meaning they have fingers, they can pick things and move things, and also hairy. What might fit that description and might also care for a toddler in the woods? And I'm sure you all know exactly where I'm going with this, don't you? We literally have, I mean, dozens and dozens and hundreds of reports dating back for centuries within Native American folklore, but also very similar reports coming out of places such as Russia and Asia, where a child is lost in the woods and the hairy man or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it takes that child and keeps it alive. And that is not an unusual primate behavior, by the way, just so you know. That's not unusual within primates. Over the decades, we have had children fall into gorilla enclosures, and most of the times, I know just the horror stories make the news, okay? But most of the times when that happens, these gorillas, they rush over to help these kids to take care of the toddlers that fall in, pick them up like they're a baby gorilla, so to speak. And in several of these scenarios, we've had the gorilla, after the zookeeper comes into the enclosure, we've had that gorilla take that baby, that child, that toddler, run to the zookeeper, okay, and pass that child off. Somehow it was like the gorilla knew that this is a human I have, and this zookeeper is also a human, and it can help them. It can take care of them. So before we dismiss what this child said outright as I don't know, the imagination of a toddler, before we say it's just something he created in his head and it did not really happen, maybe maybe we need to look at all of the possibilities here. So are the only, let's say, cryptids that are out there which are willing to protect children, are they limited to the duende or a Sasquatch or a hairy man? The answer to that is a resounding no. For those that don't know, I have watched every episode of Supernatural. Don't make fun of me. It's a good series. I like it. And there was a rather interesting episode, we'll say, where they deal with something called a Xana. And I have to give credit to the producers of that series because they search through mythology and folklore, and sometimes it's very obscure mythology and folklore, by the way, just to make sure that at least most of the details are correct. You see, pretty much every monster or creature on Supernatural, uh, they are rooted in folklore. It's not something that they necessarily, pulled out of their hat, so to speak. So the mythology of these entities called Xana, you can say Xana or Xana, by the way. Yes, I looked that up just to make sure. It goes back about at least 2,000 years. They are a creature given to us from Europe. A lot of these things come out of Europe, but it's mostly in Romania and Rome as well. It seems that the Xanas serve a couple of purposes. Sometimes they will help a noble warrior on a quest, but they're most known for helping out lost children. These creatures appear to a lost or a frightened child, perhaps a child that's going through a personal struggle, almost as a figment of their imagination. They can appear as anything, any person or creature or animal that a child will be most receptive to, so that it may help that child deal with or overcome issues, and again, so that that child will trust them and follow them, so that the Zena may lead them back to the village, may bring them back to safety. Yes, Diane. Uh, Look out for the bare necessities. I love that. Yes, you are right. The series Grimm. Oh God, I could do a dozen episodes covering all the creatures from that series. That was such a good series. For those of you that do not know, there was a series called Grimm, Grimm. Definitely check it out. If you like these kind of topics, you might like that. And they dig in a lot with German, uh, as they should, obviously, Grimm, but a lot of the ancient German folklore. Very, very good series. Very well. Um, it gets a little weird, but the inclusion of the proper names of these creatures and entities from antiquity is well preserved in that series. There, I feel good saying that. Okay, so back to these little creature things. From Native American folklore, they tell us about the little people. And I think I need to do an entire episode dealing with Native American folklore, but also tying that in with some very similar creatures from other parts of the world, because just the fact of the little people. I don't know if you're Irish. They have little people as well. One of the most I don't know. I would say one of the most interesting things when you start to look into cryptids or creatures that have been reported from across the planet, even though we may have two civilizations that never met, they will each share a very similar story. For example, we have, you ready? El Duende, gnomes, little people, Traco, Cabalder, Ebu Gogo, Nuno, uh, Chlorashon, Dwarf, Goblin, Kobold. I didn't mention that already, did I? Yeah, Kobold, Puka. We have the Menehune from Australia, of all places. And by the way, Australia was not discovered by Europeans until the 1600s. Yet the stories of these creatures predate the 1600s, predate the arrival of the European. And the reason why that's important is because every name I just mentioned, all of those creatures, they all describe a very, very similar entity. Yet some of these places, they're separated by thousands of miles and land, and they share no cultural background whatsoever. That's all I'm saying. Okay, let's get back on topic now. So these Native American, these little people, they were known for a few things. They would play pranks on the natives, and sometimes this is kind of weird, but okay. Sometimes when an adult would see them, right, these little creatures would ask that adult not to speak of their existence, even offering them a reward to keep their mouth closed. Like, hey, I'll give you this, don't say nothing. But just as a coin has two sides, apparently these little people do as well. They love children. If a child has if a child has lost their parents, they will adopt that kid as one of their own. And if a child has horrible parents, they might kidnap that child and provide it provided the life it should have. But there's another very common story about these adorable little people. When Native American children would get lost, these little people, these entities, whatever you want to call them, they would come and guide that child back to their tribe. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Just saying. Thankfully, we have a description of these little people provided to us. Are you ready? They are perfectly proportional to a regular human, except that they are very small, perhaps just 2 or 3 feet in height. And if you think about this, if you're a person, a full-grown person with a fully developed brain and cognitive function, but that person's only 2 or 3 foot tall, that little guy could wreak havoc within a village, within a town, within a home, perhaps. How often do you look for a person that's only 24 or 30 or 36 inches tall? Like they could literally be under your nose and you wouldn't know. Okay, this might be a little exaggeration. So I can't mention the little people without also mentioning a graveyard that was discovered. Now, pygmies are a real thing, and normally they are about, well, 5 foot tall. They're human just like you or me, but they range in height from about 4'9" to about 5 foot. Well, in the 1830s, it seems we discovered, a burial site, a graveyard, so to speak. But these bones, these people, they were only right about 3 foot tall, some a little bit shorter. They appeared to be human, not not like an arcane species, not an offshoot of humanity, but rather they appear to be genetically human. Everything looks like your average, everyday human being, but they're 3 foot tall, and that's not normal. It should it should not be biologically possible to be that short and still be 100% proportional. People in that height range, because we do have humans that have what's the proper term, dwarfism. We do have those people in that height, but usually they'll still have a larger head because the brain still needs to develop, and large hands, large feet, compared to their height. The hands, the feet, the head, usually that will be more of a normal height person. But not with these bones that they discovered back in the 1830s. So I would say that this discovery does lend credence to some of the native folklore involving these little people that they would help children. And again, that's kind of a common trend that we see in a few different cultures, again, separated by oceans and thousands of miles of land. I guess comes down to one question. Are these entities real, or are they just figments of an overactive imagination? Perhaps I don't know, some type of mental defense mechanism during stressful times. But if these creatures, if they are just the creation of the mind, then you have to wonder how it is that kids in North America 2,000 years ago report the same creatures that kids in China reported 2,000 years ago. Why are there such strong similarities with so much distance between them? I don't know. If you if you suffered a fate similar to those kids on the airplane, if you were the sole survivor of a plane wreck, or I don't know, perhaps find your vehicle breaking down in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by darkness, no signs of life, no help, nothing, and suddenly seeing a small humanoid creature emerging out of the shadows offering to help guide you to safety. Would you go? I think that's kind of an interesting thought given what we've heard today. I would recommend that you keep in mind one thing, and it's, yeah, maybe it don't matter that much, but for every one helpful creature from folklore, from mythology, for every one of those little helpful buddies, there are literally dozens that want to have you for dinner, as in the main course. That's horrible. Oh, I hope y'all had some fun with that one. Diane, yeah, the Pukwudgie. I know what you're talking. That's an interesting one. I'm actually, spoiler alert. I plan to in the next few days or so, after hopefully tomorrow having a very special guest, uh, do an episode about those other creatures, those ones that they might seem like they're offering help, but that's not what they're there for. So yes, and that little fellow that you just mentioned, I'm definitely going to be speaking about him because there was an interesting story involving a gentleman walking his dog. Uh, Luckily, he was under the light of a street lamp as this thing called out to him from the darkness, beckoning him to come here. He did not, which is probably why his story was able to be retold. I mean, think about it. If these things are real, if there's really these things in the darkness coming for you, or that wants to, I don't know, consume your flesh or soul, or whatever the case might be, for every one person that escapes, how many do you think wouldn't? I would say that over the millennia, they've probably become very proficient in luring people to their demise. So, I don't know, for maybe one that makes it out, there could be hundreds and hundreds that do not. All right. Thank you all for joining me for another episodes of Mysteries After Dark. It has been a pleasure. And I hope to see you back here again for the next episode. As always, thank you and stay safe.